So hello everyone, I'm here with Dr. Maria Power and Reverend Dr. Helen Paint to discuss their most recent book, The Church, the Far Right, and a Claim to Christianity. I wanted to ask you guys several questions about this, partially because of my own experience observing the far right on continental Europe and seeing the differences with what is going on in the UK. And then obviously I know that the publication date was moved forward for the book because of specific things going on, I think particularly in the north or the Midlands of the UK. Now I have to clarify, because I'm not currently living in the UK, I think I got things with a bit of a delay, the news. Yeah, and as I say, I was just in Germany, and it's interesting to observe there. So the far right does have a neo-Nazi strand, but at the same time, you do have Christians who will vote far right because of the life issues. So they will defend it for that reason. And there's an uncomfortable connection made between far right politics and issues that, say, Catholics or Protestants might want to defend, but they are afraid to defend so as not to be associated with the far right, even though the far right doesn't actually openly make Christian claims. So it's a weird, uncomfortable relationship there. Through the Alliance for Germany is the AfD, which doesn't purely use the Christian imagery. Right. So what began this project?
Well, just to touch on the point you made before I answer that question, if that's okay to chip in, Maria.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. I think you're right. The far right is very, very heterogeneous in both Germany and in the UK and elsewhere. It's heterogeneous in ideology. It's heterogeneous in the kind of faith claims it makes or employs, and we even see this right back as far as the Third Reich, which both wooed the Christian church and had explicitly satanic rituals and symbols and so on. So yeah, it's really hard to. So the far right in this country is by no means exclusively using Christian language, but it does sometimes. And I'd say similar things going on in Germany and so on as well. What's motivated the book? Well, actually, it began by looking at another book. So my own specialism is looking at how, looking at violence within Scripture, but also looking at how the Bible is weaponized in the contemporary world. And as part of my thinking and research around that, I read a book by Hannah Stroman and Ulrich Schmeidel called The Claim to Christianity. And that looked at 4 far-right groups in Europe and looked at how they are employing Christian theological language and claims. And they made some quite provocative kind of suggestions to the church. And I thought, I don't think I'm hearing this sort of discussion going on in the UK. And so that caused me to pick up the phone to Maria, and I said, should we try and do a project on this? And should we try and get a grant to run this? Maria, you can pick up the story if you like.
Yeah, so was it May we were successful in receiving funding from the British Academy, and Helen was the main did the main work on that grant. And in May 2023, we brought together 14 scholars from Jewish, Muslim, Christian, atheist backgrounds. They were from the Middle East and Europe. Some had direct contact with the far right, others hadn't. And we asked them to basically just write a paper, a 2,000-word paper responding to what they felt the book was saying and how they felt the book would land with their own constituencies. So that was a very successful 24 hours together. The conversations were very challenging and lots of ideas came up that we didn't quite expect. Such as one of the main challenges in the book that particularly the non-Christian, that's the Muslim and Jewish commentators found very challenging, was the idea that they should have any responsibility towards helping Christians sort this issue out within their own churches. And as a group, we got quite a lot of pushback on that. And in fact, when I converse, I still, and I know Helen does as well, still speak to the two scholars. That it's still something they talk about. So I wasn't expecting to see that problem, and that emerged. But also the deep, the intensity of the stories that we heard, the intensity of the emotional intensity that it took for some of the people that were actually dealing with the far right, people that were dialoguing with the likes of Tommy Robinson, with the EDL in Luton, with it up in Cumbria. What it actually took out of them personally as well was something that really struck me. And also the way that they were able to kind of translate, as it were, their own Christianity into a language that the far right would be able to understand and possibly begin to accept. So that happened in May, and then SCM very kindly gave us a contract for the book, and we asked all the participants to go away and write up their piece up to 6,000 words, and then came the riots after those awful murders in Southport. And SCM realised that this book was really needed, and we, you know, that's the feedback we're getting from people, that it's really needed. We've had a lot of very kind of a lot of interest, but a lot of actually this is what I needed to read type feedback. And so SCM brought forward the publication date. I think that's all I've got to say.
Okay, actually, I'm a bit curious. So in the discussions that you were having, did anyone sort of consider or discuss the impact of online discussions on actual actions in real life, the sort of how things can escalate very easily in social media? And I'm thinking here specifically, obviously I'm very careful. So I'm thinking here particularly Twitter. You see discussions that really don't encourage dialogue, even when they say they're trying to encourage dialogue, and that are almost violent.
So that lies in the background to a good deal of what we are talking about. It wasn't necessarily the kind of focus of our conversation, because we weren't looking at the far right in general. We were looking at the kind of particular question of how the UK church should respond to the challenges it's presenting to us. But we come out at the end of the book with 10 recommendations for the British Church. And some of those very much appertain to this question. So one of them is around youth work and the awareness of youth radicalisation. And of course, online spaces are very, very important to those questions. And some of it's around critical thinking as well, about teaching critical thinking skills and modelling critical thinking. And of course, these are all important things in navigating the online world. So yes, this is very much part of the kind of matrix of our conversation.
The other thing that came up as well was people's use of the app Telegram, which I was vaguely aware of, but didn't realise just how important it was in fueling dissent, and I know now that it was part of organising the riots in earlier in the summer. So the online issue is very important.
Yeah, and I wanted to touch a bit on what Helen mentioned, because I think there is generally in education currently, and this might be a bit of a detour, but about critical thinking. And here I'm thinking, again, in the German case, where you do have an element of neo-Nazism, considering the decades-long educational program to avoid precisely that, it really begs the question, what are we doing in the educational sphere to prevent? Because it's not just remembering what happened, but really trying to, critically thinking, what is before me that isn't exactly the same, but could lead to very similar results. And as educators, you're both at some point, I know, Helen, you do teach, and Maria, I'm sorry, I think you, like me, we're not as active.
Yeah, I do still teach though, yeah. I've taught for like 20 years, so.
So it is, how can you incorporate that into your teaching? What have you noticed in recent years that has changed in the educational sphere in reference to this? Because when I have taught seminars, and I definitely don't teach as much, what I notice in the younger generations is this sort of almost an ability to go further, to like dig deeper. And I know that's not everyone, but if you could talk a bit about that as well.
Do you want to go first, Mary, or shall I?
Yes, this is something I actually think about a lot because, as I said, I've been teaching since the turn of this century. And I've actually noticed a change in students' critical skills over the last 20 years. And this is something that I was discussing with a participant at our event at Lambeth Palace on Monday, is that young people nowadays, I don't know whether it's because of more use of social media or the whole influencer ideas, seem to be more introverted now and seem to be just more narrowly focused on their own ideas, the areas that they're interested in, and the areas that they feel can give them nourishment. And if something is not of interest to them or they find upsetting, they just ignore it or park it somewhere without dealing with it. And that's certainly a change I've seen over the last kind of 20 odd years. And I do think it is down to a kind of a lack of critical thinking, which doesn't start at university, it actually starts in schools. Because I know, Helen, you and I have talked about this in the past. Just for example, the way GCSE religion is taught.
Yeah, can I
Yeah,
chip in here?
chip in here. This is
Yeah. Thank you. So I've got 3 daughters who've all done GCSE RE within the last 10 years. And they were taught in a church school. Not that makes a difference, but because actually they were doing, the normal curriculum, but they were being taught within a faith perspective. And I was, as I was helping them to prepare for their exams, looking at their flashcards they produced and how they were responding, and I was really shocked by the way that the mark scheme was structured and by the way that they were being taught to answer questions. So basically, it was literally a mark a minute, so that you had to just bang out the points. There was no space for nuance or reflection or anything. It was just bang out the points. And they were being asked, so they studied, they had to do one major religion and then, one religion as a major and then another as a kind of, as a secondary religion for comparison. So they studied Christianity with kind of side helping of Islam. And they were being asked questions like, how do Christians and Muslims differ in their approach to end-of-life issues or abortion or whatever? And they would say, Christians believe this, Muslims believe this, and here's the reasons why Christians believe this. And they would bang out 3 biblical proof texts. And they would bang out 2 quotes from the Quran or whatever. And I would say, but hold on, that's not true. Not all Christians believe this, and Christians don't tend to hold it quite as bluntly as you're saying. And actually, that Bible verse doesn't support that. And anybody who's employing that Bible verse for this purpose isn't understanding what's going on. And they were saying, don't confuse me, it's a mark a minute, I've got to bang this out. So these young people were being taught that people of faith, that Christians and Muslims and other religions, because the curriculum went beyond that, are proof texters, are mindless proof texters who don't think critically, who don't engage their minds, who simply proof text their way through life. And that is, not only is it misrepresenting the religions, but it's actually misrepresenting them to the extent that it is reducing people's respect for people of faith. And that, to my view, was actively detrimental to us as a cohesive society.
And just to kind of chip in and build upon that, so I taught history at the previous university, and it's exactly the same with the history curriculum, which of course, what's the main thing that they do? They do the Tudors and Stuarts, and which is Protestant Catholic Reformation, and they do the Nazis. And we always used to joke, I was in a large Northern Russell Group university, that we spent our first year in the university teaching them how to think and how to read. So I agree that there is a critical issue with the education system that is causing this. We're not negative, aren't we?
Oh, yeah, but unfortunately, I'm not quite sure how not to be about this
Yeah.
particular topic.
But also to say there's teachers doing remarkably good
Yeah,
work.
yeah.
I mean,
I
this
mean,
is a comment about the systems and about the
Yeah.
exams.
Yeah.
Really, it's
I
not a
mean,
criticism of teachers.
no, not at all. And honestly, I think they're not valued enough. I think teachers have a really tough job, and the system does not help them.
No.
And a lot of them go in with a lot of ideas and idealisms and just are absolutely burnt out by the system. And there obviously does take us a bit further away from this topic, which is what to do with the system. But I'm going to return to the topic of dialogue, because I have noticed there is a decrease in dialogue. And dialogue, you need to know how to listen to the other person. I mean, obviously, what you were saying about how the younger generations are really just focused on what they're interested in, and there probably is something to do with the algorithms and social media. They spend a lot of time there, and it shows you what you look at the most, and it just shows you more of the same thing. I always joke that my own social media is cats and cakes, but it's like I can imagine if someone's like focused on far right politics, they're just going to be seeing far right politics, and you see this in so many spheres. I see it increasingly within the church, and here, as a Catholic, I know the Catholic Church better than the Protestant Church, but in the sense that even within the faith community, there is a disparity between what people think the church should be doing, what the church actually does, or what the church actually says. And I guess is there in any of these chapters of the book, or even in the recommendations, if you could go further into it, something that discusses the loss of dialogue, the sort of globalizing, like the globalizing of things, in the sense, if you are against the German synodal way, it means you're against dialogue in Vatican II, which is not actually the case, I would say, in most people's minds, but it is what people think. That's just to use a very concrete Catholic example, but it's sort of like, well, maybe it's okay to say, yeah, I don't think this is working properly. It doesn't mean the entire structure doesn't work. It's the same thing as like, okay, we don't think the educational system is working properly. That does not mean we're criticizing the teachers. But I think there has been a loss of that understanding of the good and the bad are intermingled, and we need to be able to identify that.
I think just to very quickly chip in on this, because I know, Helen, you'll have a good deal to say as well. We've lost the ability to be good guests because dialogue is all about hospitality. And we're very good at saying, come in and listen to our views and eat our cake, eat the cake we have baked, drink the tea we have made. But we're very bad at actually knowing how to behave with people we don't agree with. And I don't know what has caused that, but there is an inability to be a good guest and to respond in a way where you have a debate rather than a row. And you are able to kind of politely and constructively engage with people you disagree with. And I don't know when, where, or how we lost that ability, but I do know that ability seems to have been gone. Seems to have disappeared from society. And I know there are a number of kind of NGOs actually trying to teach people good guest skills. So that would be one of my takes on it. Helen?
Yeah, I wholly agree. We talked a lot about this in different ways. We talked a lot about contact with the other in terms of building community cohesion, which isn't quite the same, but it's kind of all related, I think. But in terms of kind of dialogue with those that we disagree with, we talked a lot about how to do this. We talked about, yeah. So I'm trying to not overcook this, because there's lots I could say, and I don't want to speak for too long. I suppose one of the key things we discussed was the power that the hosting of dialogical conversations involves, and the ways that those who host these conversations, those who, to use Stroman Schmeidel's phrase, those who kind of hold open this corridor for conversation, actually inherently, permit or exclude. And even the act of permitting is an act of power. So this is, these are complex things. It's not to say that we shouldn't be doing this. It's really important that we do, but we need to look at the ways that these dialogues take place, the ways that they are moderated, both in terms of preventing harm from bad actors, but also in terms of not we talk a bit in the book about the church positioning itself as the kind of prime upholder of democracy and dialogue. And while we believe in democracy and dialogue, we want to uphold it. We don't want by our actions to imply that others are Muslims, for example, are beneficiaries of that, or potentially even threats to that. So these things are complex.
Going back to you say you gave 10 suggestions at the end of the book. Could each of you point to one or two that you think are the ones you would most want to highlight from the book?
Yeah, I think shall I go first, Maria?
Yeah.
We talked a lot about the tendency of university educated, moderately affluent, politically liberal people to condemn white council estates for the sake of kind of oversimplifying what I'm saying, as racist, and of wanting to look at issues of structural injustice rather than labeling people as bigots, wanting to be curious and try and understand the things that drive what we might consider far-right expressions. And along with that, so that's one of the kind of recommendations, is to hold these things with subtlety and generosity and nuance. And related to that is our recommendation that we try to avoid putting. So the church in Britain is very, very good at caring for the poor, for the refugee, and people who are struggling in these ways. But so often these ministries, these activities and projects are competing for the same resources. They're competing for support by churches, for prayer support, for financial support, and so on, and for people's interest and concern. And what that tends to do is it tends to pit what I might call indigenous hardship, which is often white, and against what we might call immigrant hardship. Sorry for the labels, but I'm trying to kind of explain the concept. And it pits them against one another, in competition with one another, which reinforces so many unhelpful things that are already going on in our society. So if we as church can bring these things under the same umbrella so that they're not in competition with one another, I think that that's a really positive step forward.
I would agree with Helen on that. I'm very keen on the idea of dealing with the structural injustice that leads to this radicalization. But the recommendation that sticks with me the most is the idea around how we need to be working with the youth more, and how we as churches need to do more with our young people to educate them about our own doctrines, but also to take them out to meet people that would be other, and to kind of demystify communities for them. I think that there is a lot more creative and imaginative work that the churches could be doing around that. And I know from my experience of researching youth groups in Northern Ireland that it's very successful and actually leads to a reduction in crime and leads to a reduction in radicalization. So I think the churches could be learning from Northern Ireland and from other conflict zones, because I do think that this has some of the characteristics of a conflict. It's a conflict surrounding structural injustice.
So if is there any resources that could be used from the Northern Irish case for other countries? And I think that ties in with the question I've been having about the book. Where do some of these authors come from? What is their focus, like geographically? What are they focusing on? Because it is a global phenomenon that is occurring, at least in the West. And I'm currently based in Spain. I see the reaction there is amongst the sort of immigrant youth versus the Spanish youth, and how the Spanish feel, oh, the immigrants are getting all the benefits. So it is definitely happening. So I'm just curious a bit about that, and then obviously the connection with Northern Ireland.
Helen, do you want to?
Yeah, we had one participant from the Lebanon, Martin Achad, and he is currently, or he was, I think he's just moved role actually, but he was leading a very, very interesting project there about storytelling, about remembering historical events that are narrated differently by different societies, and finding ways of allowing those stories to be heard and told across the traditional divisions. Really significant work. And also coming out of Lebanon, which doesn't, well, I only touch on it briefly in the book, although I do mention it in my concluding chapter. There's a project called Bread and Salt, which was working with Christian and Muslim young people. And it was bringing them together around food to talk about their faith and their differences. And that project was piloted in Lebanon and has now been rolled out as something called The Feast in the UK, and is being used successfully in a number of places to do exactly that, to bring young people of different faiths together to get to know one another, to learn to trust one another, and to talk about what they hold dear in their faith, and to understand what the others hold dear in their faith. So there's a couple of really good resources there.
And I think in terms of the Northern Irish context, if you look at the work of the Koinonia community in the Glens of Antrim, they're doing really amazing work, just bringing young people to other churches and to other places of worship. Literally just allowing them to get to know one another and get to understand one another in the way that the Feast is doing here. I mean, one of the problems that we faced in the UK until recently, until the last election, was that we didn't actually have any far-right people elected into our parliament. So that allowed people the excuse of saying, well, we don't have far-right politics here. And in fact, I've had that conversation so many times with people who, because until July, we didn't have an elected member of parliament, they just wanted to stick their heads in the sand and think it wasn't happening, when in fact it was.
So going back to the book, where, and this is just really practical, where can it be found? Are you holding a book launch, etc.? If you have a copy of it, hold it up. There you are. If anyone wants to get it,
there we go.
There you are.
So it can be purchased from the publisher and from all good bookshops, including the online ones that we love to hate. It may be, at times it is cheaper via the publisher, so it's always worth having a look on their website as well. That's SCM Publishers. We are having a number of book launches because we're very keen to bring these proposals to the attention of the church in the UK. So we've already had a launch in the Senedd, the Welsh Parliament. This week we've just come from Lambeth Palace, where we had we were able to discuss these ideas with the Christian Muslim Forum, with the Archbishop of Canterbury there. We are having an event in Oxford shortly, looking at some of the Baptist identity issues that might help with this. We've got an event in London in the spring around the youth work recommendations. We've got an event in Birmingham in January around the kind of white working class race questions. So there's a whole load of things. And if people want to connect with those, we are listing, or follow us on Twitter, follow the Centre for the Study of Bible and Violence on Twitter. Or if you look us up, find our website, you can sign up to our mailing list, or even email me personally. My email is on there. On our website, we also have a list of all the events that are coming up with booking links where relevant. So please, we'd love to see people at one of our events. And we're still interested in, we've still got a few gaps around the country that we haven't kind of covered yet. So we're interested in, if anyone's got in, you know, anyone listening is interested in hosting some, particularly in the north of England, we're very keen.
Okay, so thank you for being here with me today. This is a really interesting discussion, a very interesting book. I will definitely look it up. Yeah, hope you have a lovely rest of the week. Thank you.
Thanks, Maricela. I'm going to stop recording.